Had panic.
We're going live. But I don't know. Return to meeting. Oh. Okay. We're live. We are. Okay, so, and it's 5:58.
We're early this time.
We're early, Jessica. You were frozen, but you're all right. For some weird reason, you're over there now on my right. You're normally on the other side, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. But anyway.
But everything's okay. We look fine.
I think we look great. Okay, so hi everyone. Hope you're all well and ready for part 2 of the 3-part series on the dingo. I'm Jenny from the Complete Pet Company and Complete Canine Communication. I'm not going to go through my normal intro because I'm assuming a lot of you are coming back for part 2 and hopefully part 3. So this particular presentation, Jessica, welcome and tell us a little bit about what we can expect with this presentation.
So this presentation is all about the characteristics of the dingo. So their physical appearance, what makes them different to our domestic dogs, their diet, raising young, and a bit on their language too. So that's a really quick overview of what's in there.
Okay, so tell us, was this one easier than the last one, or have you found during the week that it actually turned into a bit of a nightmare as well?
Well, I thought the first one was going to be the most difficult one because it was the most research intense for me at the time, and because there was so much conflicting information. And I thought for this one, I'd got it all pretty well sorted, but as I came to finalizing bits and going back and, putting little bits of information in, things started to pop up that weren't quite right. So I ended up down research lane again, and we did too, Jenny. And yeah. So
we actually, just so everyone knows, we had quite a late night last night. We stayed back at the shop till late discussing all sorts of things, which will come up today in the presentation. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So it's just after 6 o'clock. We've got a couple of comments there. So I'm just going to check, Jess, and make sure that, yep. Okay, so we've got a couple of people there so far. We've got 5 people watching, but I'm sure more will join us. Jen's back there again tonight. Jen Parker, she's with us again. So hi, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
And Machiavelli. Okay. Before we start, I was actually going to do this at the end, but I think I might do it at the beginning. I just really wanted to acknowledge Fraser Island and the dingoes on Fraser Island, but not just the dingoes, all the wildlife there. It's a terrible predicament, and it's going to be really interesting to see and very sad to see the outcome of these terrible, terrible fires on Fraser Island, because we know how important Fraser Island is for the dingo in this country. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and hopefully down the track when we find out a little bit more, we might be able to all put our hands out to help a little bit in some way for the wildlife on Fraser Island. Okay, so Jessica, I guess this is my time to hit mute and get rid of me off video, and you to go onto your presentation. And if at any stage you want me to come in, just holler.
Will do.
I'll be here with my ice water.
Sounds nice.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll pop it up now and you just let me know that it comes up okay, Jenny. Okay. Is that all good?
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, I'll just stop my video too. Can I find where it is? Okay, so the dingo, physical appearance and characteristics. So to start off, I thought I'd just begin with some really basic information on the physical appearance of the dingo, their height and their weight. But before I start the presentation, I actually just do want to say, like Jenny and I just discussed, I thought this one was going to be simpler than last week, but found out, along the way of finalizing things that it wasn't. And the reason that it wasn't is that there is so much conflicting information in the research world on even some of the basic things to do with the physical appearance and characteristics of the dingo. So in doing my research, I end up with all these pieces of information that don't quite line up. They might be saying a similar thing, but there's not one clear answer. And then for me, I have to go and corroborate which ones are correct. So a lot of the stuff in the presentation, you'll hear me say, there's not much research we don't know, or there's so many different conflicting answers. And that's why, and it makes it really hard to pull out factual information on the dingo. So what I've done with information on their height and weight, for instance, is even though different sources might give slightly different ranges, I've looked at everything and gone, okay, well, which ones match up the most? And that's the information that I'll give to you. Okay, so on average, dingoes generally grow to be between 48 and 60 centimeters tall. Some dingoes will grow to be even larger than this. It's not uncommon on Fraser Island, especially, to see some larger dingoes, as it's said that the Fraser Island dingoes do tend to grow a little bit larger than other varieties on the mainland. Once dingoes are fully grown, they tend to reach a weight of between 10 and 20 kilos. Overall, male dingoes grow to be taller and heavier than females. Same with dogs and wolves and other species. And the life expectancy of a dingo in the wild is around 10 years, and in captivity they can live anywhere up to 20 years. The longest recording living dingo, wild or captive, has lived to be 18 years and 7 months old, which is a very long time. So moving on to the physical characteristics of the dingo in terms of their anatomy, their morphology, and how they differ structurally to our current day domestic dogs. There's several notable differences in the structure of the skull of the dingo and today's domestic dogs. And the first difference that I'd like to talk about here is the fact that when you look at the dingo, you'll be able to see that their cheekbones are actually the broadest part of their body. This means that the front of their chest is narrower than the broadest part of their skull, the distance between their cheekbones. And this physical feature ensures that in the wild, any space where their head will fit, they know the rest of their body will follow. You can imagine that's quite an advantageous trait in the wild if you're fleeing a predator or on the run, to know that, okay, my head can get through there and so will the rest of my body. In domestic dogs, on the other hand, the front of their chest is broader than their head, so their shoulders stop them from going any further through a small space. So you can see in the pictures here the difference between the dingo's skull and the front of their chest and that of a domestic dog. And obviously all domestic dogs today are different. We've got so many breeds of dogs of so many different shapes and sizes. So I've just pulled a couple there, like the Australian cattle dog and the well-known Labrador, to show you the difference in the shape of their head, or the ratio of their head to the front of their chest. You can see in the dingo, the front of their leg, like the front of their chest and where their legs come down, is quite lean and narrow, whereas in a domestic dog, it's much broader. There are several other differences between the skull of a dingo and that of a dog. And here on the top, I've got a picture from a 2019 study that several researchers conducted on the taxonomy of the dingo. And the reason why I wanted to use this image is because it directly compares the shape of the dingo skull on the bottom there to that of a dog obviously of similar size. And in fact, the dog skull shown in this image here is from a free-ranging dog. So we're not just talking about the differences between like the dingo and your own pet dog at home, but also the differences between dingoes and free-ranging dogs that are obviously more domesticated than the dingo is as an animal. So compared to dogs, dingoes have a flatter skull and they have those broader cheekbones. So when I was looking at the differences between the shape of the skull of the dingo and the dog, to me it made sense the dingo had broader cheekbones and a flatter skull. The dog's skull is not as flat and it doesn't have as broader cheekbones. So everything in the dingo is kind of flatter and more elongated. And obviously as the shape of the skull has changed, things have changed shape. Dingoes also have a longer muzzle than domestic dogs, which means consequently that their teeth are more widely spaced. So you can see there the length of the dingo's muzzle is longer than that of the dog's, and that the dog's muzzle has actually become shorter as a result of domestication. And as a consequence, dogs' teeth are placed more close together than the dingoes. Now this makes sense if you look at what the dingo is eating in the wild. They're still killing live prey and ripping and tearing animal skin and flesh. So for the teeth to be more widely spaced, that means that they're not going to get that flesh and skin stuck between their teeth when they're doing that. Our domestic dogs don't do that anymore. We might feed them raw food and bones, but they're not doing the same ripping and tearing actions as they would if they killed their own live prey. And so they don't need those widely spaced teeth anymore. There's also differences between the actual teeth of a dingo and the teeth of a dog, not in terms of what teeth they have, but the size of them. So they have larger and longer canine teeth, which are the teeth that are used for puncturing and wounding prey. They also have larger incisors at the front of their mouth. So if you look at, on the picture comparing the two skulls, the far left one that shows you the front of the skull, you'll be able to see the dingo's front incisors are much larger and longer than that of a dog. And the incisors do all the ripping and tearing. So like I said before, dingoes are still doing that. They're still hunting wild prey and ripping and tearing flesh. So they still need those longer incisors, whereas our domestic dogs are not. They also have larger carnassial teeth, which are their molars, which do the scissoring and the chewing and the grinding. So their teeth are still suited to their wild carnivorous diet. Now, one of the other differences that I ended up looking at between the skull of a dingo and the head of a dingo and the head of a dog was actually their eyes. So when I was doing research on the dingo, obviously came up that dingoes have fantastic peripheral vision, and that greatly aids them in the wild as well. But we know that dogs also have fantastic peripheral vision. And then I got into wanting to understand how the dingo's eyes are placed on the skull that gives them slightly greater peripheral vision than our domestic dogs today. I was reading in the research that domestic dogs have rounder and more forward-facing eyes than dingoes. We know the dingo's eyes are almond-shaped and sit at more of a slant than domestic dogs. And this is what Jenny and I got into, but how does that give them greater peripheral vision than dogs? How does that give them greater peripheral vision than us? And how do they measure the peripheral vision of a dingo? Because with us, you can, sit in front of somebody and say, okay, tell me when you can't see your hand anymore, but with a dog, you can't do that. So there's no research into the vision of dingoes, and there's very little research into the vision of domestic dogs as well. But what I did find was looking at the different skull shapes of domestic dogs and how their eyes are placed And Jenny and I eventually did come to a conclusion and figure it out. And so that's what I'll try and explain to you now. So if you look at a human skull, you'll see that our eyes are placed flat on the front of our head and they face forward. Now this gives us approximately 180 degrees of peripheral vision. So if you all sit facing forward now and stare forward at whatever's in front of you and put your arms out and move them round to the sides of you, you'll see that when you get to about 180 degrees, that's when you'll no longer be able to see your hands. So that's our peripheral vision, and our eyes sit on the front of our head and they face forward. Now in dogs, we have 3 different shapes of skulls as follows. So on the left we have the shorter muzzle, flatter skulls that belong to your dogs such as your Boston Terriers or your Bulldogs. The middle one is the most common skull shape seen amongst dogs. And then the one on the far right, the more elongated skull shape, is the one you see in greyhounds and whippets and sighthounds. Now, Jenny and I were also discussing that the fact that dogs with longer muzzles tend to have, or are said to have, better vision and sight than those with the shorter noses. And when you look at the shape of the skull, you can see why. So the one on the far left, the brachycephalic skull, you can see that, well, when you saw in the human skull, our eyes face directly forward. You can see in the brachycephalic skull, they don't face directly forward, but they're not as slanted place as the elongated skull on the far right, for instance, the ones that we see in our greyhounds and our whippets. So the eyes in a brachycephalic skull are more forward placed than the ones in most of our domestic dogs, which is the middle shaped skull, which is slightly more angled. And then our sighthounds and dogs with really long muzzles have even more angled eyes again. So the front of the eye will sit at the front of the eye socket there, and the back of the eye, obviously, at the back of the eye socket. So to me, it made sense that if the eyes are placed at more of an angle, so the back of the eye is placed towards more the back of the skull, then of course the dog is going to be able to see more of what's around it, to the sides of it. And the research does say that dogs on average have a peripheral vision of approximately 250 degrees. Now, obviously, as we know, we've got different shaped skulls and each domestic dog is different, so there is a range. The average is 250 degrees. Brachycephalic breeds, the shorter nose breeds, tend to have peripheral vision of only 220 degrees. So a little bit more than us because their eyes are not forward facing, but not quite so much as some of our sighthounds, which have up to 290 degrees peripheral vision because their eyes are placed on more of an angle. Now, when we look at the dingo, we can get rid of that skull because we know the dingo is not a brachycephalic shaped skull, and its skull is not as long and elongated as this one either. So the dingo has the most similar shaped skull to that which we see amongst most of our domestic dog breeds, like your Labradors, your mini schnauzers, you know, most of your general dog breeds. So here we have the skull of a dingo. Now, we talked about before that dingoes have longer muzzles than domestic dogs and flatter skulls. So their skull is most similar shaped to this shape of domestic dog skull, but you can see it's longer, which means that their eyes are going to be placed on more of an angle compared to the domestic dog shaped skull. And so then we got into looking at how they measure the angle of dogs' eyes and therefore work out the peripheral vision. I mean, it's all good and well to read in the research that dogs through domestication have more rounded eyes and more facing forward, but when you're looking at pictures of just dogs and dingoes, it's quite hard to see that and imagine that. So when we were looking at the way in which they actually measure the angle of dogs' eyes, what we found is they draw a line from the back tip of the eye to the center of the eye, across like that, and that's how the angle of the eyes is measured. So I've just done it here on a picture of a dingo, a wolf, and a dog, so you can see the differences. So this is our dingo, and this is the angle at which its eyes sit. You can see it's got those almond-shaped eyes, and I've drawn the line showing the angle of the eyes of the dingo. And what I read in the research was that dingoes' eyes sit generally at 45 degrees, which means that that angle created there, each angle created by the blue line there, is 45 degrees from the center, from straight forward. Now, I'd read obviously that dogs, through domestication, their eyes sit more lateral facing, so more forward. But then I was thinking, well, the dingo we know is more closely related or not as evolved from the wolf as our current day domestic dogs. So I wonder how the dingo compares to the wolf. So here I've got a picture of the wolf, and again, the angle of the eyes. Now you can see the wolf has very similar shaped eyes to the dingo, again, those more slanted almond-shaped eyes, and they sit at roughly that 45-degree angle again is what I read in the research. And obviously, like, each picture is taken at a different angle, so the lines that I've drawn are not going to be exactly correct. But when I put the one of the dog up, you'll see the difference. You can see that dogs' eyes sit at much less of an angle than that of the dingo and that of the wolf. You'll also see they're slightly rounder. So they sit more lateral facing, more forward facing compared to on a slant. Now they don't sit as lateral facing as ours, so they've still got fantastic peripheral vision, but the fact that the dingo's eyes sit at more of an angle gives them even a little bit of a better peripheral vision than our current day domestic dogs, which makes sense. If you look at them, they're still living in the wild, and having that fantastic peripheral vision is a great trait in the wild. You can see all of what's going on in your surroundings. But because we know the dingo is less evolved from the wolf as our current day domestic dogs, it makes sense that they share this eye shape and angle with the wolf, whereas our current day domestic dogs, they don't necessarily need that trait as much anymore. So through domestication, their skulls and their eyes have evolved so they don't sit at as much of an angle. Having said that, we know they still have far better peripheral vision than us. So that's one of the differences that I came across, ended up coming across in my research on the difference between the dingo skull and the domestic dog skull. And like I said, it's something that came up a little bit last minute, and Jenny and I spent a long time last night trying to figure out the peripheral vision of dogs and dingoes and how it's measured, because like I said, there's not much research into it at all. There's hardly any research on dogs' vision, and understandably why you can't say to a dog, okay, tell me when you can't see my hands anymore. Okay, so moving on to some other physical features of the dingoes. Dingoes have very acute hearing. Their ears sit erect and pricked on their head, similar to the wolf. And it's said that they do have slightly larger ears than domestic dogs of a similar build. Obviously, when we're comparing dingoes to a domestic dog in that way, we're comparing them to a similar shape, size, build of domestic dog. Dingoes can also move each ear separately, so often one will be pricked and the other will be rotating to pick up extra sound and noise, which you can actually see in that picture there. One ear is pricked forward and the other is rotating. So there's obviously some sounds going on in the distance that the dingo is picking up. Dingoes have an incredibly powerful jaw, obviously for killing and eating wild prey, and they also have those longer, sharper teeth that we just talked about. Dingoes are very agile creatures in terms of running, speed, jumping, and their climbing abilities. It's said that they can run up to 60 kilometres per hour for up to 40 kilometres in a day. They can also jump 2 metres off the ground. And they're also expert climbers and are said to often be escape artists. And one of the reasons for that comes down to their flexible joints. A dingo's joints are much more flexible than that of a domestic dog. Almost all of a dingo's limbs are double jointed, which means they can partially dislocate their hip joints. They're able to rotate their wrist joints. So often you'll see they use their paws a lot like hands. And they have a really flexible neck. They can bend their head over backwards and also turn their head 180 degrees in each direction, which we know our domestic dogs can't do. And that flexibility would help them be expert climbers and escape artists, as people call them as well. And they tend to stand on high ground to survey their surroundings. So here I've just got a nice diagram that I found of the most prominent physical features of a dingo. So you can see the broad skull, as we talked about, the cheekbones being the widest part of the body, the flatter skull, the almond-shaped eyes, which you can see in that picture there, are situated on that slanted angle, the longer pointed muzzle, wide opening jaw. In terms of their coat, they have thicker fur around their neck and chest and on their tail, a bushy tail. Dingoes are quite lean. They're often seen much leaner than your average domestic dog. And it says they're lean, muscular legs and large foot pads. However, you'll see a little bit later when I get to talk about the variations in dingoes that, depending on where a dingo lives, it also has slightly different physical characteristics. So yes, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the variety of coat colours which can be seen amongst dingoes. And this was something that I thought was pretty simple as well. But when I came to fine-tuning my presentation and my research, I found that, again, things were quite a lot more complicated than I first thought they were. Pieces of information didn't corroborate and match up. Different sources say different things, and there's things that we still don't know as well. So we know that dingoes come in a variety of coat colours. However, there's a lot of contention in the research over which coat colours are actually seen in pure dingoes and which have arisen as a consequence of hybridisation with domestic dogs. So the most commonly well-known coat colour amongst dingoes is the ginger, with the white markings on the feet, the underbelly, and the tail tip. So this one here. And when sources talk about the ginger coat colour variation in dingoes, they refer to the various shades of that as well. So you have the more red dingoes, and then you have the more tan, yellow, golden coloured dingoes as well. And many people have believed that the ginger dingoes and the golden dingoes are the only pure dingo. However, we know that's not the case. Other coat colour variations that can be seen across Australia include the black and tan variety, the sable variety, which sable is the same coat as like German Shepherds have. So in a dingo, they have that golden, like that sandy golden yellow colour, but then they have the darker brown or black dorsal fur, the fur running along their back. There's also white dingoes and cream dingoes as well. So these are all the coat colour variations which can be seen across Australia. However, like I was saying, it's unclear if all of these coat colour variations originally existed in pure dingoes or whether some have emerged as a result of hybridisation with domestic dogs. And it's unclear exactly which ones have. So we know that the red ginger and the golden yellow coat is a pure dingo colour. However, it also can be seen in hybrids of dogs and dingoes. So even though that is an original pure coat colour, dingo dog hybrids may present with that coat colour as well. A few sources refer to the ginger, the white and black dingoes as being the three original pure coat colours of dingoes. But it's interesting, we see a lot of black and tan dingoes in Australia today, but quite a few sources also mention just black dingoes or black and white ones as being the original pure coat colour. And in one source that I was reading, it was actually a book from the Queensland government called Fauna of Australia. I was reading that in European settlers' early reports on dingoes, only the ginger, the pure white, and black and white coat colours were recorded. And that indicated that the black and tan variety, for example, that has emerged may have done so as a consequence of hybridisation with free-ranging or domestic dogs. There's also a high level of dingo hybrids in the southeastern region of Australia where the black and tan dingoes live. The same source also talked about when dingoes and dingo crosses are bred in captivity, the ginger coat colour proves dominant over the other coat colours. So Jenny and I were talking about this, and we were saying that the coat colours seen in dingoes would also come down to genetics. When you breed two dogs or like two animals, you have the dominant traits that occur, but also the recessive ones that are still present in the genes but don't express themselves. So what I was reading that is that the white and the black and tan varieties occur as recessive traits, and the ginger and the yellow variety dominates over them. So even if you had a litter of dingoes and both the parents were ginger in colour, you might still end up with one that's white or one that's black and tan if it's inherited both from the mother and the father, the black and tan recessive traits. There's also been a debate over whether the sable coat colour in dingoes is a hybrid coat colour, but some research has suggested that the evidence of this coat colour in dingo skin samples from the 19th century, so from the 1800s, indicates that it may not be a result of hybridisation and it could be a pure coat colour. And interestingly, the same research, which was looking at illustrations of dingoes from 19th century and pre-19th century and skin samples as well to look at the coat colours, that same research also found that the white markings on the tail, the feet and the underbelly, so well known and seen in dingoes today, were not actually found in any of the skin specimens from before the 19th century. And they were also rarely mentioned in any of the early European reports on dingoes, which I found really interesting because that suggests that maybe the white tail tip and the white socks on the dingo emerged a little bit later, which is really interesting because that's a really well-known feature of our dingo. All in all, the ginger coat colour, which refers often as well to the more golden dingoes, is certainly the most commonly seen across Australia. Data from 2001 stated that approximately 74% of Australia's dingo population consisted of those with yellow, red or tan coats with the white markings. So we know that all of these coat colour variations occur across Australia. You can see them all. But when you look at the research and you read the research, there's still debate between experts and scientists and researchers which coat colours were originally found in pure dingoes and which have arisen as a result of hybridisation with domestic dogs, so crossbreeding with free-ranging domestic dogs. So in addition to the different coat colours which exist, dingoes are placed into three categories based on where they live in Australia: tropical dingoes, desert dingoes, and alpine dingoes. And again, when I was reading which coat colours exist distinctly in each of the different habitats, it was not entirely clear and a little bit hard to decipher from the research that I was reading, because different sources say slightly different things. In the end, the information that I found from the Dingo Foundation was the most detailed and consistent with other sources. So that's what I went with when looking at how dingoes are classified based on where they live. So the desert dingoes obviously inhabit mainland central Australia, and the coat colours seen there are commonly the red ginger coat colour, which blends into the reddish soil of the outback, and the golden yellow colour, which was blended into the background of the more sandy desert areas. What I found that was interesting was that you can also see white dingoes in the Australian desert. These are less common but found in areas with salt flats such as Lake Eyre, where their white coat would blend into their surroundings of the salt flats. Desert dingoes tend to have quite lean and long legs for traversing the flat plains of the desert and the outback and pursuing prey for miles across the flat plains there. Now, the Alpine dingoes are the dingoes that inhabit the mountainous regions of Australia, so mainly the Australian Alps situated on the southeastern coast. You still see the ginger variety in the Alpine dingoes, but you often commonly also see the black and tan and the sable coat colours in the darker forest areas. The darker black and tan coats and the sable coats camouflage quite well into the darker forest, as you can imagine. Alpine dingoes are a little bit of a stockier build than other dingo varieties. Their legs are not as quite long and lean, and their whole body is just a stockier, sturdier build, which you can imagine would be advantageous in the rougher, more even mountainous and forest terrain. Unlike the desert dingoes, they're not running miles across flat plains, but they're instead having to navigate, the rough floor of the forest or the steeper mountain slopes. They also have a thicker coat than other dingoes varieties. So Alpine dingoes have a thick double coat, which helps them to keep warm in the cooler climate. And some research that I was reading as well found that dingoes who live in the alpine regions, their fur grows to be up to 3 times more dense than dingoes living in warmer areas. So again, adapting to their surrounding climate and environment. And finally, the tropical dingoes inhabit the north and northwestern regions of Australia. You still see the ginger variety there. So the ginger variety is the most commonly seen coat colour of dingoes. You might also see the cream coat colour variety there. They have a thinner coat for obviously the warmer tropical weather. And they're also a finer build than the other dingo varieties, which is suited to some of the steep rocky terrain there, allows them to be nimble over that. So on the mainland of Australia, these are the 3 different types of dingoes we have: the tropical dingoes, the desert dingoes, and the alpine dingoes. All of them have slightly different physical features, like we've just talked about, suited to their surrounding environment. So obviously when dingoes colonised Australia and spread into the different areas, they've adapted to their surrounding habitat. What this map or these classifications don't include is the Fraser Island dingoes, which Fraser Island is our most purest population of dingoes, as they've been isolated from dingoes on the mainland and also dogs on the mainland as well. So they haven't had that inbreeding between dingoes and dogs, which has resulted in the high levels of dingo hybrids which we see in mainland Australia, which is why it's really important that we preserve and conserve our Fraser Island dingoes. They're the purest dingoes we have left. So when I was researching and on the Dingo Foundation website looking at the different types of dingoes and where they live, it was saying that the Fraser Island dingoes are actually a unique variation of the Alpine dingoes. And to me, when I read that, it made sense, because when I look at the Fraser Island dingo and compare it to the Alpine dingoes, you can see they actually share some of that sable coat. So even though they are a golden yellow colour, sandy yellow colour, they've still got that darker fur along their back, which is similar to the sable dingoes found in the forest in the alpine areas. Dingoes that live on Fraser Island and those that live on in coastal areas on the mainland do have larger foot pads to obviously help them cope with the sand. And like I said, they are the purest variety of dingo known. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it's said that Fraser Island dingoes do tend to grow to be a little bit larger than other dingo varieties as well. So the next thing I want to talk about is a dingo's diet, what they eat. So we know that dingo is an obligate carnivore. And you remember in my presentation from last week that I talked about dingoes don't have copies of a starch digestion gene, which our domestic dogs do, because they've never been exposed to or lived with agricultural groups of people, and therefore never have needed to evolve to be able to digest those starches in the foods that other domestic dogs would have been exposed to. Now, the starch digestion gene is what produces amylase, which we have amylase in our saliva to digest starches. But because dogs don't have dingoes, don't have the starch digestion gene, it means they're not producing any amylase in their saliva. So their diet is made up purely of what they kill in the wild and what they eat. They can, if they really need to, they will scavenge and eat plant matter, because they do have a small amount of amylase in their pancreas, so they can digest that. But unlike domestic dogs, who a small proportion of their diet is made up of those vegetables, dingoes eat purely meat. They will eat anything from kangaroo, wallaby, possum, wombat, reptile, birds, insects, and eggs. Their natural diet was changed with the introduction of rabbits and other feral species when the Europeans settled Australia in 1788. So you can imagine prior to that, the dingoes are eating native Australian wildlife like your kangaroos, your wallabies. Then the Europeans came in, they brought large numbers of rabbits with them, and also other feral species like your feral cats, your feral foxes. And so the dingo's diet adapted to include those as well. And rabbit now actually forms a large part of the dingo's diet. However, their diet does vary with their habitat and where they live in Australia as well, of course. So in Central Australia, there's lots of rabbits and you don't have much larger mammal prey. So a dingo living in Central Australia will be eating majority rabbit as part of its diet. In Western Australia, the rabbits are not as prevalent, but larger prey such as your red kangaroos are. And in Eastern Australia, it's said that possums and wallabies form a large proportion of the dingo's diet there. So obviously, wildlife differs across Australia depending on location, so will the dingo's diet. Fraser Island dingoes have a little bit of a different diet to the dingoes on the mainland. They eat bandicoots, echidnas, bush rats, the swamp wallabies on Fraser Island, also grey kangaroos over there, and as well fish. Their diet does include crustaceans and fish, which is the main difference to the diet of the dingoes on the mainland. Fraser Island dingoes also do consume small amounts of native berries, the midium and the blue flax flower over there. And I'm assuming that would be for self-medicating purposes as well as diet. Like I was saying before, dingoes are an obligate carnivore, so their diet is made up of meat and only meat. However, if they need to, they will, same as a wolf, scavenge and eat other things like plant matter. The Fraser Island dingoes eat the native berries there. Dingoes will also consume carrion, which carrion is the decaying flesh of dead animals. So if they find a dead animal, they'll eat it. And that greatly helps with our ecosystem as well. They will also eat dead livestock if they find it, which helps them survive when their natural prey is not as readily available. Larger packs of dingoes may hunt and consume larger prey. For example, I read that in the snowy mountains, dingo packs will occasionally hunt and kill wild boars there and eat that. Often dingoes are actually seen to be hunting alone. Sometimes they'll hunt in pairs, and occasionally they'll hunt in packs if they are pursuing a larger prey. On average, wild dingoes consume approximately 7% of their body weight in food per day. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about water as well. So in summer, dingoes drink approximately 12% of their body weight in water, and in winter, only approximately 7%. And when I was researching, I came across a really interesting fact. So lactating females obviously require more water per day, but they've actually developed a special behavior to try and reduce their water needs and recycle the water that they're getting, because as you can imagine, in the middle of the desert in Australia, there isn't plentiful supply of water. So the mother will lick her pups in a certain way to encourage them to urinate and defecate. She then consumes that urine and feces, and in doing so, she actually regains more than 30% of the water which she provided to the pups through her milk. And you'll see, like, that behaviour can be seen across several different mammal species across Australia. It's a behaviour that they've adapted to reduce their needs to consume water each day, because as you can imagine, in some habitats, it's not readily available. And Jenny was telling me as well that dogs actually do the same thing. So moving on now to mating and raising young. So unlike our domestic dogs, dingoes only have one breeding season a year. Domestic dogs have two. The breeding generally occurs from autumn to winter, so approximately from March to June, which makes sense when you think about it. The pups are born in the winter months because firstly, this is when water needs are at their lowest. So the dingoes are not needing to consume as much water as in the summer. It's also when the risk of threats such as parasites and predators is at their lowest, so it optimizes the dingo pup's survival. In a pack of dingoes, only the alpha male and the alpha female are permitted to produce offspring. It's said that other pack members can still mate, but their pups will then be consumed by the alpha female within a few days. So in a pack, it's only the alpha male and the alpha female which reproduce. The gestation period of a dingo is 63 days, and then the pups are born in underground dens or a similar safe place, such as hollowed logs. Litter sizes are on average between 4 and 6 pups, but they can range anywhere from 1 to 8, same as domestic dogs, litter sizes range. And both the mother and the father are heavily involved in raising the dingo pups. It's actually said that the entire dingo pack contributes to bringing up the younger dingoes. The dingo pups will normally leave their den for the first time around 3 weeks of age. They're then generally fully weaned from their mother at approximately 8 weeks, so 2 months. By 3 to 4 months, they start going on hunts for smaller prey. So they start to hunt, and they're generally fully grown physically by 7 months of age. Now, it's said that males reach sexual maturity at 1 year of age and females generally not till they are 2. However, some females will produce litters earlier than 2 years. But it's generally the social restraints of the pack that stop a dingo mating earlier. Even though females are able to reproduce in the next breeding season, they don't because of the social order of the pack. At 3 years of age, it's said that dingoes will pair up with each other and mate for life. Unfortunately, the survival rate of dingo pups is sadly quite low. What I've read that was on average only half of the litter make it past their first year, and then only 25% of that make it past the first year will reach adulthood. And because this is the case, it's quite interesting. If there's an orphan dingo, dingoes from another pack will often adopt that orphan dingo and raise it themselves to ensure their survival, which makes sense. It's all in the wild, it's all about ensuring the survival of the species. The next thing that I wanted to discuss was a little bit about how dingoes communicate. So their main form of vocal communication is howling. They have various different howls for different situations and purposes, same as our domestic dogs have various different types of barks for different situations and purposes. Now, many people believe that dingoes don't bark or can't bark, and in fact they do bark, but very rarely. And when they bark, it's often short and sharp, quite harsh, and it's not continuous like a domestic dog might bark continuously. It's done once or a few times and then that's it. And when I was reading, there was a bit of conflicting information on why they bark, but it seems that they usually do it in circumstances that involve warning or alarm. One thing I read was they might do it to warn, the mother might do it to warn her pups and call them back to them, or they might do it in a situation where they're really alarmed. So when I was thinking about how dingoes communicate, I started thinking about body language and actually calming signals. Now, when I was doing research, there's no research on calming signals in dingoes. For those of you who don't know, calming signals is the language of dogs, the language of wolves, coined by Trude Rugas from Norway. And so we know that the dingo evolved from the wolf. It's not as evolved as our domestic dogs, but it did evolve from the wolf. And so it too must use some of these calming signals that we see wolves use. Like I said, when I typed into Google, there's no research on it. There's obviously research on calming signals in dogs, but not in dingoes. But then I was looking at pictures of dingoes and I could see them using some of these signals that we see in dogs. In domestic dogs, we know there's over 30 different calming signals that they use. But here are some of the ones that I found when looking at pictures of dingoes. So lip licking, we know that in dogs, they often lick their lips as a calming signal. And often dogs will do this, like if you're trying to take a picture of them, they may lick their lips because they're not comfortable with the camera facing at their face. And when I was looking at pictures of dingoes, what I was imagining was like obviously a camera pointing at a dingo trying to get a picture of them. And this is why I think you can see quite a few of these calming signals that we'd see in dogs coming up. Yawning is another calming signal that we see in dogs, and although that may not be a picture of a dingo yawning as a calming signal, I'd imagine that they would do it too. There's another one of a lip lick and a yawn. So for me, like somebody might be trying to take a picture of these dingoes and they might be communicating, I'm not comfortable with that. And the head turn is another really common calming signal that we see in dogs. Dogs do it when they meet each other. They do it as well when they're not comfortable in a situation. And this picture here actually came off like a zoo website. So again, I was imagining somebody was trying to take a picture of this dingo, and you can see from the picture the dingo doesn't look too comfortable with it. And I'd imagine that's why it's turning its head away. We know that dogs also use calming signals such as sitting, laying down. And so you can see those in dingoes too. Obviously, dingoes and dogs sit and lay down for various different reasons. But this is just when I was thinking about it and researching and looking at pictures that I was thinking, I'm sure as using body language, dingoes would do the same. And here's a picture of a dingo sniffing the ground, which we know in dogs sniffing the ground is a displacement behaviour. And from looking at that picture, I would imagine that dingo is doing the same. And here I've got a couple of pictures of dingoes meeting. When you look at two dogs meet, you see them give off a lot of calming signals. This is their language. This is how they communicate with each other. So in those pictures there, you can see one dingo's turning its head away. They're curving. Dogs don't meet straight on. They curve. And you can see when those dingoes are meeting, they're doing the same. They're not meeting head on. They're curving to each other. They've both got their heads turned slightly away from each other as well. So another signal. So although there was no specific research on calming signals in dingoes, when I was thinking about how dingoes communicate, like I said, I was thinking about calming signals going, well, calming signals, we know wolves use calming signals, that's where it's come from. And dogs use calming signals too. And because dingoes evolved from wolves, then I'm sure they must use some of these body language signals that Trurid Rugus has identified in dogs. And that brings me to the end of my presentation on the characteristics and physical appearance of the dingo. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Yeah, and then I've just got my reference lists at the end here, which are quite long because, like I said, when you're researching and different things are saying different facts, you want to make sure you're getting the correct information and corroborating all your information. So I'll pop myself on video again now. Let's stop sharing.
Oh, hello.
I'm back.
Very interesting again. Yeah, a lot of things I found really interesting there. And of course, I've got more notes.
No, you would have.
Yeah, I noticed a couple of comments. Someone commented that they eat grass. Well, you know, we know they eat grass. Lots of animals eat grass, and they eat berries and all sorts of things because we know of zoopharmacognosy and self-medicating. And so we see our domestic dogs do it. We know all animals do it. There's quite a bit of information on that. So, but it was really interesting how you talked about the amylase, and we know that they are an obligate carnivore. So, of course, if they can't get hold of food, like I said to you when we were talking about this, you can't eat glutens, but if you're hungry, Jess, you would eat glutens.
Yeah, I sure would.
Yeah, so it's the same. But I got what you were saying. I thought that was pretty interesting. Also, the wolf signals are the cutting off signals, but
yeah, sorry, I got that.
No, that's okay. It's the same, the same thing, but just just in case someone wants to jump in there and say something about that. But calming signals for the dogs, and you're right, is Trurid Rugus, and they call them the cutting off signals. They're a little bit different again. And I thought that your photos, and like you quite rightly said, you don't know because you weren't there when those photos were taken. But it's really interesting that they do have very similar signals. And a few years ago, a girlfriend, Graham, and I went for a trip a fair way out of Brisbane it was a dingo sanctuary. And the reason I wanted to go there was to observe the dingo language. And so I had my little GoPro and I sat it down quietly. And of course, we sat on one side of this huge dam and they were two Fraser Island dingoes from memory. And the signals that they gave us were very, very interesting. But one of the things I did notice, and I don't know a lot about it because I don't have any dingoes in my backyard that I can observe, and we're in Queensland here, so thankfully we can't have them in our backyards either. But they sort of make this weird, like sneezy, snorty thing. Dogs do that too. In actual fact, when they get anxious, they can do sort of like a little sort of a noise. And I found that quite fascinating. So there might be some dingo experts out there that could give me a little bit of information back on that one. But it is, yeah, that I found that quite interesting. What else did you talk about? I really hate those ear tags. Oh my goodness, aren't they nasty? Big things.
Unfortunately, they make one of the ears flop down quite a bit, which you can imagine, like as I was talking about, dingoes have pricked ears for a reason. It helps them hear, all of the acute sounds in the wild. And if one of those is flopped down, it would impede their ability to do that. So, yeah.
Absolutely it would. I could understand that because I have continuous ringing in one ear, and I know how much that impacts, just my everyday hearing. Fascinating stuff about the peripheral vision. I want to know more about that.
I know we got quite stuck into it, didn't we, Jenny?
Yeah, and there's a few, there would be a few people in here that I studied with in Spain, and part of our, the course was we had to measure the distance between dogs' eyes so we could try and work out, if there is much difference between the domestic dog and what they see. So your hunting dogs versus your sight dogs, et cetera, and there wasn't that much difference. But when you and I sort of, and people on there that have dingoes are probably going, oh, these people are really weird, this is common knowledge. But when we sort of sat there last night and really studied these almond eyes and the 45 degrees, and it made sense about where they're sitting, and we talked about the chicken, and we talked about the horse having the eyes on the side, so therefore they've got incredible vision. I mean, they can pretty well see all the way back there. So I want to know more because that would tell us a lot about the big differences between those wild dogs in comparison to our domestic dogs. And I know our domestic dogs have great peripheral vision. So okay, let's have a look. The puppies are very cute. And also the teeth, I found that quite fascinating as well. And that's the same with the wolf, isn't it? The teeth they have a lot of gaps between them, whereas the domestic dog has had a lot more sort of jammed into that jaw. So they have a number of teeth, but they're a lot closer together.
Yeah.
What were the things that you found sort of most fascinating about this particular research that you did?
Well, for me, it was the peripheral vision thing. I mean, once we got started on that, I just had to know, because I read one thing that said the dingo's eyes were placed at 45 degrees, but I remember we were sat there going, well, 45 degrees which way? Like, this is, which way is the degrees? And with pieces of paper and drawing and circles and things, and
we're sitting there going like
this and like this, and which way is it? But then when I looked at the skulls of them, I remember saying to you, but to me that makes sense. Like if their skull is more elongated and their eyes have to sit on more of an angle, like the back of their eyes is further back, then of course they're going to see more of their surroundings. And then we got into drawing lines on dingoes and wolves' eyes, but I found it really fascinating looking at, like, we know the dingo has the almond-shaped, quite slanted eyes, and they're set at that angle, but when you look at the wolf, they're really similar.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the domestic dog, how you can see they're more rounded and not as an angle. So that's one part of the dingo, like, that hasn't evolved much from the wolf compared to our highly domesticated dogs today.
Absolutely. Well, I have to let you in on a little secret. I spent today looking at my dog's eyes. because I've got, you know, like the sidehounds and I've got hunting dogs and and I'm sort of looking at them thinking, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's very obvious. So yeah, some people might want to add to that. Okay, so Letty's just come on there and said, ha ha, I thought about the eyes in the study when she heard you talking about it.
Yeah.
Letty was with me on the course and part of that. Nuria from Spain said it's very interesting. So we've got our Spanish people here, which is great.
Yeah.
Mark Jace Wicks said, love this. Well, good. I'm glad, Mark. That's really nice.
Glad you found it really interesting.
Liana said, another very interesting and well-researched presentation. Jess, well done.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can find some more comments. Sometimes they don't. I might go on my phone. It's a very strange thing how only some, if you can go on and see any there, Jess.
I shall try.
Someone mentioned earlier, you might recognise the name, said about the dingo, the Fraser Island dingoes not being the purest in Australia.
Okay.
I can't see the comment now, but you will recognise the name, Jessica. And she said that they are unique. They are a unique dingo, but they're not the purest dingo. And then there was another conversation going on about the DNA, but you'll be able to have a little look at that later on. Julia said, well, thank you again, Jess. I'm now falling in love with the precious dingo. What a significant part they play in the ecosystem. They're so smart, and it's fascinating how they adapt. She said, I love how in depth you've gone and the comparisons to the domestic dog. I'm really interested in the social rules you mentioned and the breeding and the pups. Brewing some questions, already looking forward to the next one.
Discussing the raising of the young before earlier today, actually, weren't we, and how that sort of works. And I couldn't really find like super in-depth information on when exactly, you know, the dingo pups will leave their mother, etc. And again, it was like conflicting across sources. But we were talking about, how the whole dingo pack raises the pups, similar to wolves would do in the wild, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really interested more now as well, and something that we can, you know, look into, you know, like the ages and stages of development. I want to know about fear periods. Very interesting. I want to know about licenses, whether they have, not licenses having a dingo, licenses as far as the puppy license goes, how that actually works. All those types of things I think would be, you know, quite fascinating, especially for those people that have dingoes that would like to know more about the developmental stages and what is really important, because we know with the domestic dog that those stages are extremely important as to how we, you know, work with our dogs and what we expose them to and what we don't expose them to. So I think that would be quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in the like similarities and differences between the stages of development in dingoes and domestic dogs as well. But that would require a whole lot of other research too. So
yeah, well, who knows who we can find out there, Jess? We're just, you know, we're quite resourceful. If there's anyone watching that, you know, might be able to point us in the right direction and you know, we can look at some proper research, you know, that would be extremely helpful as well. Anything else anyone's got to say? I also, you know, wanted to mention something, and again, because we don't have dingo here as pets in Queensland, you talked about the anatomy, and I found that quite interesting because they're quite similar to the Norwegian Lundehund. And the reason I know that is because I researched that breed and found it absolutely fascinating. They're the little puffin dogs for anyone watching. And they can do all sorts of weird things with their body, very similar to what you talked about with the dingo. And I was just going to say, you know, we're very passionate at the Complete Pet Company about correct fitting equipment. And so I just thought I'd bring that up, you know, maybe to finish on with, we know that there's a lot of vital organs in the neck of any canine or any animal, and we should protect it. And so we're very, very passionate about educating people on putting the right equipment on dogs. So do you think that would be important for dingoes as well, making sure that we have a low Y that sits down low on the sternum and something that sits back from the front legs so that it's evenly distributed over the body, over the rib cage, sitting on the wither with an H, rather so than collars and these incorrect fitting harnesses, Jess?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to put equipment on our dingoes, we should treat them the same as we would our dogs and any other animal, as in wanting them to be comfortable, in no pain or discomfort. And we know that the dog's anatomy is basically the same as the wolves. It hasn't changed. And the dingoes would be the same. It's going to have all of those same vital organs in the neck, all of those same, you know, vital organs throughout the body. So certainly having that correct fitting equipment would be really beneficial to any dingo wearing, equipment like harnesses and collars. And just to finish as well, there was a couple of questions in the comments from last week's live where I said they'd come up in this week's live. I think somebody had a question about whether there'd been any studies done on the different coat varieties in dingoes, which I talked a bit about when I was researching the coat colour varieties in dingoes, and I was actually reading scientific papers on them and which, you know, ones were originally the pure coat colours and which have emerged as a result of dingo dog hybrids. So hopefully I answered your question there. There was also a question on whether the New Guinea seeing dog is the same as the dingo in terms of only having one breeding season per year, which I did go and research really quickly. And yes, they are the same as the dingo. They only mate once a year as well. So just wanted to answer those questions from last time too.
Yeah, well, that's really good of you to do that. So there you go, guys. Thanks, Jess. I'll say thanks on behalf of them for you going out of your way to answer those. Now, we don't profess to know everything about the dingo, and, you know, like I said last time, Jess is learning, and I think she's gone to a lot of hard work to get the best information that she can. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and if there's anyone that's watching that may be able to help Jessica with her, you know, research and study, that would be really nice. You know, if you could always send Jess information to jenny@completepet.com.au, and I can pass that on to Jess. I know you'd be really grateful for that, wouldn't you, if we could, you know, keep building on this?
Yeah, definitely. Would be amazing.
We need to protect our dingo, and we need to find out as much as we can about it. Absolutely. And there's so much to know, especially about behaviour, emotion, and how we can make, you know, do a better job to have them in our homes for those that do. Okay, well, I can't see any more comments, but you'll go on there and check later. Thanks again, Jess. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect for your last presentation.
So my last presentation is going to be a bit about where we are with the dingo today and its conservation moving forward. As part of that, I'll talk about the relationship that the dingo had with the Aboriginal people before Europeans came to Australia, the history of that, how things changed, and how important the dingo is in Australia, in our ecosystem, and therefore why it's so crucial to conserve it as well. So that's a little bit about what's coming up next week for the last presentation.
Cool. I'm sure we're going to see you again after that, though.
Maybe.
I got lots of things running through here that I want to get out. So.
Oh, goody.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thanks, guys. We'll come back and check the comments and and like I said, there are a few that I read earlier, but I can't get back on. You know, something about I read it quickly about the dingoes in WA being quite pure, and like I said, someone commented about the dingoes on Fraser Island not being the purest but unique. So we'll go back and check.
I'll go and have a read of that. But yeah, like Jenny said, I'm researching and learning. So sorry if I made any mistakes. It's what I found from my research. And like I said, it's quite difficult when you're researching and trying to find correct information as well. So I'll go and have a look at those. And but any other information, like Jenny said, is really helpful too.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jess. And I'll see you tomorrow at work.
See you tomorrow.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, guys.